Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the invitation. It's good to get out of Madison. I purposely live in a different county. There's a good reason for that. And just drive in. I have to skim in and skim out each day to keep my sanity. I would be in big trouble back in Green Bay at our main office if I didn't tell you a little bit more about DBA. Like a lot of good ideas, we were born in a bar. So some of you might be PDPW members, great organization. After a PDPW board meeting, some members stayed afterwards, had a couple, kept talking, and thought, boy, it would be great if we had an organization that was to what PDPW is for education and farm development, if we could have some organization like that for policy. And out of that conversation grew Dairy Business Association. We represent farmers of all different sizes. We also have members who are from affiliated businesses, whether that's ag lending, all the way down to custom haulers, any kind of thing that's related to dairy, those are our members. Which means, of course, if you are a member, great. If you're interested in becoming a member, I'd be happy to talk to you about that too. So I'll leave that plug, but what we're trying to accomplish is to provide a better regulatory and legal environment for dairy farming in Wisconsin. When we came into being, cow numbers were still declining. The number of farms was in a steep decline as well. The number of farms, unfortunately, is still declining, but cow numbers and milk production are up, back up again. And I think, in part at least, to some of our efforts to assure better livestock siting laws here in the state, so that people who wanted to grow and expand in Wisconsin could do so more easily. So, welcome to all the dairy farmers, and welcome to everyone else who wishes they were a dairy farmer out there. One of our big issues this year, and it's actually been an issue that arose really last session too, deals with high capacity wells. Now, some of you might have high capacity wells on your farms now. Others of you might not even know what a high capacity well is. So we'll start with just the basic definition. A high capacity well is a well or a collection of wells on one farm that can pump 100,000 gallons per day. So some of you who may not have one well that accomplishes that, you still might be subject to the regulations, because you might have one for your milking parlor, one for your barn, one for your home, and combined in aggregate, they have that capacity. Now, the problem with high capacity wells, at least from our perspective, really started back in 2011. We had some wealthy lakefront homeowners in suburban Milwaukee who were worried that the town of Mukwonago, in building a new well, would make their peers less pleasant. So they sued Mukwonago, saying you shouldn't build this well because we don't want our lake level to drop and we don't want our property values to drop. And that case went all the way up to the state Supreme Court. It was called Lake Beulah, named after the lake association that brought the lawsuit. Now, that has nothing to do with agriculture, but it's had big impact on agriculture. There's two big ironies associated with this case. One is that by the time the case got decided in the Supreme Court, and for the lawyers in the audience, they aren't probably not surprised by it, but for some of you who have been fortunate enough to avoid that career path, you might be surprised that this case really started in circuit court probably in '06, doesn't get decided by the Supreme Court until 2011. So it's a very long and drawn-out process. So by the time the case got decided, and decided in the Lake Association's favor, Mukwonago had built the well and had been using it, and the lake had not been negatively impacted. So even though what they were fearful of, which is the lake would have a negative impact, didn't really happen, still they prevailed on the basic premise that DNR should have more say in when these wells are permitted and how they might impact surface waters like lakes and streams. Now, we are not California, and our position is that we shouldn't be regulated like California. Since this case has come down, DNR has struggled with how to regulate and be in compliance with this case without the legislature telling them, here's how you should regulate these new well permits. So we've got plenty of water, but there are a few areas of the state where there's a tight connection between groundwater and surface water. So that increased pumping in one area might draw down a lake a certain amount, or might draw down a stream. Now, this happens primarily in the central stands, so the central part of the state, which also happens to be an area where we have a lot of irrigation. Not so much for dairy, because you see from the chart here, dairy has very few of the high-capacity wells. Most of those are actually used for other areas of agriculture or things completely unrelated to agriculture. But in the central stands, there's heavy irrigation for vegetable and potato growers, and other forms of agriculture require a lot of irrigation on that sandy soil. So we have a lot of irrigation there, and this very tight connection between groundwater and surface water that makes people uncomfortable. What we're proposing is trying to regulate just those areas that have that problem, identifying them with science, addressing those areas that are problematic, and letting the rest of the state get back to something that approximates the easy permitting process we had before 2011. Right now, DNR has about 170 permits that are backlogged there. We'd like to see some of those get moving, especially those that are, again, in an area where that new well would have no real negative impact on anybody. They're just having a hard time going through the process of evaluating all those applications because of the regulatory uncertainty. So there's two bills out there right now to try to address part of this issue. The first one is sponsored by Senator Gudex from the Fox Valley area. It's also co-sponsored by someone in this room. So this bill would look at how to address issues with existing wells, making sure that people, if you already have a high capacity well, that you could replace it, repair it, or transfer it to the next generation, or if you're going to sell your land to somebody else, that you could transfer that well without triggering a new evaluation, and in most cases making your bank pretty nervous. So that's the idea behind this bill, is to make sure that those people who already have those wells can transfer them without having to worry about it, or if they go down, they can fix them in the middle of growing season without having to worry about it. So it makes very good sense. It does not look at how to speed up the process for brand new wells. To do that, we need to look at the Coles bill. It's by Senator Coles from northeastern Wisconsin, the Green Bay area. Both bills have had hearings in the state Senate. Both of those hearings were fascinating hearings to go to, because everyone said these bills sure are nice, but we want more, or we think we need to change or tweak this. So to hear everyone from every political stripe pretty much say the same thing, that doesn't happen too much in Madison, so it was an interesting experience. And both bills, I think, are still works in progress, and we'll see what happens. The floor period for the fall is over, so we won't see much action probably until after New Year's, but there might be some additional hearings and hopefully some forward movement in the meantime. And DNR really does need the help. I think they're the first ones to admit that they don't have the guidance they need to do their jobs effectively and in a timely manner, and they'd like to be, told, given the clear guidelines of what it is you expect of us after this court decision. Because the court decision was good in saying that we've got a problem, but not in saying, here's the step-by-step way that we need to address it. Implements of husbandry. This is something some of you may have been already dealing with. I'd say, unfortunately, for you, probably. Kind of a tedious process if you're trying to get heavier equipment permitted by your local authorities. We do have members who probably need to apply for a couple of hundred permits to use their different equipment. That's an extreme case, but certainly out there. For those people who are servicing you, the co-ops, some of them have had to apply for thousands of these permits. So and this is our first year, really, our first total crop cycle where we've had this law in place. Some people have been cited. I don't think enforcement's been too bad. Anyone a proud owner of a implement of husbandry overweight ticket in this room? No? Okay, good. That's good. Some of you hopefully have your permits, and some of you might live in an area where they opted out of the program. It was local units of government were able to decide what level of participation they wanted, including no participation. So if you happen to have a highway commissioner who didn't like the idea of additional paperwork, you might be out of this program altogether. The law was a good intention attempt to deal with heavier equipment. We see, for those of you who might have made it down to Farm Tech Days, which was down closer to where I live this year, I'm always amazed by how each year it seems to get bigger and bigger. That is not greeted as enthusiastically by those people who maintain the roads, and especially because we have pretty tight resources on how to protect our roads. So this is an attempt at least how we can make some of those heavier vehicles legal while still making sure that our roads are safe, our bridges are safe, and we're not getting undue wear and tear. But logistically, because you had to get a permit for anything that's over the new weight threshold from every unit of government that maintains a road that you travel on. So if you happen to drive through 2 different counties and several different townships on both county and town roads, each and every one of those jurisdictions you'd have to go get a permit from, all of which, because I told you they can opt in as to their level of enforcement, they could have different rules as to what you would have to do to get a permit. So it has been a challenge, I think, for a lot of people to navigate the system. Already, the legislation, which is not very old, it was passed last session, has already had a trailer bill, so one sort of fix-it bill. And fix-it bill number 2 is in the works right now, so that shows you that there's a recognition, at least by the legislature that the bill, while a good idea, still needs some tweaks on how it's being implemented. One of the big changes that we're advocating, at least, would be multi-jurisdictional permits. You could go to DOT, say, I'm going to drive through those 2 counties and those 7 townships. Am I safe to do that? And DOT would give you a green light for all of those, and you'd have one unified permit for your operation for that vehicle versus having to go to each and every different jurisdiction. Another bill that we're working on is designed to ease manure transfer. The question is whether or not you can run drag lines and pipelines through the right-of-way of streets and roads for manure transfer. This actually ties in nicely with the Implements of Husbandry bill, because the whole purpose of that bill was to make sure we're protecting the roads, we're getting heavy equipment off the roads, or we're making sure that heavy equipment only drives on roads that it can handle. And this would hopefully accomplish those same goals by getting a lot of manure haulers off the roads and using drag lines more effectively to move a lot of liquid manure. The question is whether or not this is legal now, which is what the penguins are hinting at here. And I would say yes, it is. And you might be already doing it, and you might be already doing it without any discussion with your local unit of government who maintains that road. I'd say that probably not so legal. But you also have an informal agreement with your local government about allowing you to do that. Some of you may even have run culverts. We have lots of members who've done that, so they can use their drag line more effectively. This bill would just try to clarify that. The Wisconsin Towns Association, which gets all of our town leadership together and tries to advocate on their behalf, is just concerned about the ambiguity. It's trying to clear that up. There is a draft bill right now that's being circulated for co-sponsorship until tomorrow. So we do expect it to be introduced, hopefully have a hearing, and hopefully get the traction it needs to move so that we can calm down the local, our local leaders, and empower them to make sure that they feel very confident that they do have this legal authority, as opposed to sort of guessing at it, and some of their lawyers probably saying, yes, you do, and some of their lawyers probably saying, not so fast, and probably a lot of lawyers saying, you probably do, but what if you get sued? So we hope this bill will clarify things. There is still some issue for permitted farms. Farms above a certain size have to get a special permit. It's called a WPDS permit. Some of these farms have separate regulations they have to follow. These farms are called CAFOs, commonly in the media. So these larger farms have a separate set of rules they have to follow, and we're trying to make sure that those rules jive well with this new legislation, so that whether you have 699 cows or 700 cows, you can still benefit from this same piece of legislation. Next thing I want to talk about briefly is farmer-led watershed initiatives. This is basically the Clean Water Act coming to agriculture. And I ask, of course, whether or not we're ready. I think we are, but we've got some work to do. Some of you might be participating in a project the DNR has funded in the Red Cedar. Is there anyone who's participating in that Watershed program. We're kind of in that neck of the woods. We have one down closer to home in the Rock River Basin called Yahara Pride Farms. And this one was actually started by private industry. DNR is not involved. But they've done a great job of getting farmers involved in promoting best management practices to prevent runoff and clean up surface waters. And they did all that without DNR saying, you must do X, Y, and Z, but instead just showing farmers that this is how we could effectively make these improvements, and we can maybe even make money from the improvements. So we can both make a good fiscal decision and a good environmental decision and a good public relations decision all at the same time. So we're pretty excited about these. DNR was too, which is why they spearheaded creating the one up here for red cedar. We worked along with some other agricultural groups to get money in this year's budget to help start more of these groups throughout the state. And not surprisingly, we asked that DATCAP, which is the Department of Ag and Trade and Consumer Protection, that they administer the program just because farmers tend to relate a little bit better to DATCAP than they do DNR. So we asked that they be put in charge of administering this grant funding. That money did get through the budget process. So we're eager to get several more of these projects up and running throughout the state. We do anything we could do as an organization to participate. I'd encourage all of you also to participate. When the Clean Water Act passed back in the 70s, a whole bunch of money was thrown at industry and municipalities, basically point sources. And by point source, I mean if they're letting a pollutant out or a nutrient out, they've got a pipe. You can see that pipe, and that's the point at which the pollution's coming out. Now, for farmers, we don't have a pipe that you can point to, but we do know that at some instances, and usually just from 2 or 3 events, we do have some runoff events because of weather that we could probably do a better job of managing. So the question is, how do we do that? And how do we do that proactively to make sure that we're not being hit with a regulatory hammer in 10 years? Because a lot of the people who are point sources are probably getting anxious about the fact that we're not seeing the reductions we should in some of these nutrients, and they're pointing the fingers at us. So this is a great opportunity for us to get out in front of this. Yahara Pride is actually taking their certification process, which is where they walk through your farm and talk about best management practices, and they certify you, and it looks like that's now going to be a green tier program in conjunction with DNR. They're bringing that and rolling it out statewide soon. So that's something that I'd encourage you all to keep your eye on, to maybe want to participate in, to get involved in the Red Cedar Project if you're not already involved. I just think it's going to be a really important part of what agriculture needs to do, again, to be proactive instead of reactive. Then, because I figured I might be running out of time, I just threw a bunch of other stuff in here. So here's a laundry list of other things that are out there that I at least want to mention very briefly. There's a regulatory reform bill. Act 21 is a pretty big deal for a lot of folks in Madison, but Act 21 doesn't mean a whole lot to everybody else. But all of our state agencies write rules while the legislature writes laws. And these rules, sometimes the agency got a little carried away with their rulemaking process. So the governor signed the law, Act 21, in his first year of office, that would try to curtail their ability to do that without express permission from the legislature. This regulatory reform bill basically is an additional helper to that initial effort. We hope that it would make it more clear to DNR what their limits of their rulemaking authority is, so that if you're facing a new regulation on your farm, it's something that the legislature said DNR can do to you versus something that DNR just thinks they can do to you. There's the food share bill that's made its way almost all the way through the process, and that bill would, Ag was interested in it just because it would limit the ability for people who get food share to obtain certain different kinds of agricultural commodities. So if you happen to be selling those commodities, you were worried that it might cut into their ability to buy what you're producing. There's a bill being circulated about passing agricultural vehicles in no passing zones. I'm not even sure that we've all decided how we feel about that bill. And maybe you all have totally different opinions, although you're probably the guys out there getting passed. There's changes to the central ag lien filing bill that a lot of folks in ag finance are excited about, and some people in agribusiness are nervous about. And there's also restructuring of the Producer Security Fund. This fund is something that some of you might be paying into. There's different funds set up for both dairy, grain, and potato and vegetable farmers. There's a big potato and vegetable farmer default this past year, which means basically dairy and grain paid off the money from the potato and vegetable default, and they're not so keen on that idea. So there's a new discussion about how we can reform that law and maybe segregate the pots so that if there is a large default by one of the segments, they'd have to recuperate the money themselves and not rely on funds from other industries. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.